There we are. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you once again. And you've got the sheet in front of you. Um, I first gave these talks on St. Mark's Gospel an awful long time ago. I've completely forgotten what I said. But the passages are still there, so presumably I'll say something that will be of use. Now, essentially, I think what this talk is about is Jesus calls and people follow. There is a calling from Jesus and there is a response, which is called a following. Now, if you start off with that very first passage, which is chapter 1, 16 to 20, as he passed by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting their nets into the sea. They were fishermen. Jesus said to them, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." Then they abandoned their nets and followed him. He walked along a little further and saw James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They too were in the boat, mending their nets. Then he called them. So they left their father Zebedee in the boat, along with the hired men, and followed him. Now that's really very, very straightforward. Jesus says, "Follow me," and they immediately follow him. So he says, "Follow me," and call and response. What is sort of slightly strange about it is, what is Jesus saying? What is to follow Jesus? What's it mean to follow Jesus? When Jesus is saying, "Follow me," what's he actually saying to them? And they literally what's happening is Jesus was walking along. We hear that twice. He was walking along, and it basically says they left the boats and they walked along behind him. In other words, the following is almost comically restricted in meaning to walking behind somebody. Now, you know how it is with children when you've got a child, and most of you have had children at one stage or another, and you're walking around the house and the child just follows you around. Have you ever noticed this? They like following and similarly, you have animals, you have a sheep, and the lambs follow the sheep, and so on. It's very strange, but there's something that's what following means, walking behind somebody. So clearly, what this is asking us is it's raising in our heads, well, what exactly does it mean to follow the Lord? Now, the person reading the book is reading about the call and seeing the response, and he or she, as they will ask themselves, well, what does this following mean? The answer will be contained in the rest of the book. The book is an exposition. This very short book of St. Mark's Gospel is an exposition of what it means to follow Jesus. Following Jesus is clearly important, but right now it is right at the beginning, 16 verses in, it's a concept of great importance, but a concept that doesn't have any content. And then we have this. Once again, he went out along the sea. All the crowd came to him and he taught them. And as he passed by, once again he's walking, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the customs post. He said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. Quite literally, he walks behind him. While he was at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners sat with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. So it's not just this Levi who follows Jesus, Levi, the customs post administrator or whatever he is, but also a whole load of tax collectors and a whole load of sinners. Now we're getting a slightly wider vision of what it means to follow Jesus, insofar as following of Jesus is not limited to certain classes of people. Now, the first four are all fishermen from Galilee. And so presumably, fine, upstanding working men. But now we've got cheats and shysters and hucksters and mountebanks and, dishonest coves, tax collectors, and sinners, people of highly questionable morality. Well, in fact, not highly questionable, people of no morality at all, it seems. What their sins consist in is not made clear, but outcasts, can we say. So suddenly we've widened the circle of the call. Now, what is this saying to the reader? It's saying to the reader, whoever you are, even if you are a dodgy accountant or tax collector, you too can be called. Even if you are a sinner, you can be called. For there were many who followed him. Many of the sinners have followed Jesus. So who are you now reading this book? Should you put the book aside saying, no, I am not worthy. I am beyond the pale. Therefore, this book does not concern me. I will put it aside. No, it's an encouragement to go on reading because it's saying sinners were following Jesus. Well, hang on. If sinners were following Jesus, then surely there must be room for me as well. Now, that comes in the second chapter. So, right in the second chapter, we're showing that the potential disciple, the potential follower, the potential member of the church can be somebody who is regarded as a sinner or who is regarded as an outcast of hitherto existing religion. Okay? Now, the other thing is what we have again and again in St. Mark's Gospel is that Jesus is being followed by people. For there were many who followed him, it says in verse 15. Then it goes on in chapter 3. Jesus withdrew towards the sea with his disciples. A large number of people followed from Galilee and from Judea. Hearing what he was doing, a large number of people came to him also from Jerusalem, from Idumea, from beyond the Jordan, and from the neighborhood of Tyre and Sidon. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for them because of the crowd, so they would not crush him. He had cured many, and as a result, those who had diseases were pressing upon him to touch him. Now, this is interesting. So we've heard in verse 15 of the second chapter, many followed him. But now it gets even bigger. We have the local sinners were following him. Now we're getting the international crowd are following him. Because we've got people from Galilee and Judea, Jews, particularly the ones from Judea, proper Jews. And then, of course, people from Jerusalem, well, really kosher Jews. And then from Idumea, which is where King Herod came from, not really kosher Jews. And then you've got from beyond the Jordan, which is sort of Greek-speaking Gentiles, and from the neighborhood of Tyre and Sidon. Now, who is the most famous character in the Bible who comes from Tyre and Sidon? Yeah, which one?
The one with the daughter.
No, well, she's not really famous, but the really famous one is, of course, Queen Jezebel. She came from Tyre and Sidon. And anybody who reads this said, what? Where Queen Jezebel came from? I mean, it's just like Tyre and Sidon was, of course, where people worshipped Melkart and Astarte, and, of course, where people made huge amounts of cash by selling purple dye. The Phoenicians were, in fact, the richest people in the whole Mediterranean, sailing as far as Cornwall and this, that, the other, the great traders, and loaded with cash and very sophisticated people. So how come very sophisticated people are now following Jesus? And why this list? And then it says, he told the disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, so they would not crush him. This is quite extraordinary. The followers of Jesus are not people who sort of hold their distance. They want to get really, really, really close and crush him. And it's not they crush each other, but they will crush him. And then they were pressing upon him to touch him. Now, this is so. What I think this is saying is, the reader is not being invited. Remember, the whole book is an invitation to follow. The reader's not being invited to follow an idea. The reader is being invited to follow a person. The reader's not being invited to follow a person in the sense of a great man who you've heard about, but the reader is being invited to get close to a physical presence. The word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, says St. John. Yes, I know that's not written by St. Mark. But in St. Mark's Gospel, they want to press the flesh of Jesus Christ. So he really is a man, and they want to touch him. It's not mental. Oh, I'm really interested in this guy's ideas. It's rather a desire to grab hold of him. Now, I think there is something Eucharistic in this. Where do we encounter the Lord physically, flesh to flesh? In the Eucharist. And it's also very much against the Roman idea of Roman religion, which is for educated people, which was you must raise your mind above this earth to the ideal world of the forms, as Plato called it. In other words, you must contemplate truth, you must contemplate beauty, you must contemplate what's that other thing, oneness, and so on and so forth. In other words, you must have an out of the body experience, which is what Romans who were serious about religion were doing. They didn't really believe all this nonsense about sacrificing sheep to Venus and so on. They thought it was good for the common people to do that. But the intellectuals were having this out-of-body experience. This is an in-body experience. And it's good for everybody, because even people from town-sighted could have it. Okay, then it says, and so Jesus is like a magnet, and they're like iron filings around him. And of course, the reader thinks, well, who is this man who attracts so much attention? Anyway, he said to them, this is chapter 6, come away by yourselves to a deserted place of rest for a while. People were coming and going in great numbers. You need to notice this, a large number of people again, in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. Second time, of course, they go off in the boat to get away from the crowds. People saw them leaving, and many came to know about it. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before him. When he disembarked, he saw the vast crowd. His heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Now, this is interesting. He began to teach them many things. Well, what things? This is the Son of God we're talking about, aren't we? So could you please be a bit more specific and tell us 5 things Jesus taught? St. Mark cannot be bothered to tell us 5 things Jesus taught. No. And also, we also had this earlier. He was teaching them, again, we had, where is it? He told them, so they would not quite could many understand this. Yes, okay. But he began to teach them, we're not interested in the teaching, we're interested in the man himself. He is not a teacher. I mean, I know he's a teacher, and they called him rabbi, teacher, but this is not a teacher. This is a presence. That is what it's saying there, I think. And people he went off by boat, and they rushed around the side of the lake to get to where he was going on foot. Now, you do get the urgency of following Jesus. So now we're 6 chapters into the book of 16 book chapters, and you get a growing sense of urgency that these people were following Jesus, and we, the reader, we must do the same. We must not lose our chance, and the chance we have to follow Jesus is provided by the book itself. Now, then, of course, well, what does it mean to follow Jesus? It does become a little bit more filled out. Remember, it's not an assent to a body of teaching. It's rather the adherence to a person. And it says, this is what Jesus says about those who are following him, the vast crowds. Whoever wishes to come after me. So you want to follow me? Right. Then what you've got to do is take up your cross and deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake, and that's the gospel, will save it. What profit is there for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? What could one give in exchange for his life? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this faithless and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of when he comes in his Father's glory with his holy angels, with the holy angels. So the number one thing of following Jesus is to embrace a life of asceticism, of self-denial. And that comes in the chapter 8, right in the middle part of the gospel. So now we understand what it means to follow Jesus. It means to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Follow the one who carries the cross. As he carries a cross, you too must carry a cross. In other words, as Jesus is going to die on the cross, you must get ready for a similar fate. And I suppose it's not too fanciful to say that the people who believed in Jesus, the first people who believed in Jesus, it's assumed by many that the vast majority of them were martyred. We haven't. That is one way of looking at it. Of course, the great historian of these things, that guy who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, what was he called? Gibbon. That's a name, not a species. Gibbon was terribly anti-Catholic, and although he was a lapsed Catholic, and Gibbon claimed that very, very few people died in the persecutions. He said probably Peter and Paul were executed, but hardly anybody else was. Whereas, of course, the church in its tradition says, that something like 300,000 people were put to death under Diocletian. Probably an exaggeration. But the people who read this, the majority of them would have had to face a great deal of hardship for their belief. Either they would have been put in prison, or they would have had their goods confiscated, or they would have been executed, or they would just have lost career opportunities. If they were civil servants and things like that, they would have had to go without promotion and so on. Okay, so that is what we are being asked to do, to deny ourselves. Now, Jesus is being completely honest here. If you want to follow me, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. And accepting the hardship is part of the following of me, part of being a Christian, is to renounce the world. Now, of course, here we have something quite revolutionary, because the whole point of being a Roman is to do well in the world. As you know, Romans constantly were boasting about their, what's the word I'm looking for, their worldly achievements. So if you did well, you became the consul, you put up an arch to yourself. And so everybody could admire the fact that you had become a consul for the second time or the third time or the first time or whatever. And that's why we have so many Roman remains, because the Romans were so keen on glorifying themselves. So, the Flavian amphitheatre, i.e. the Colosseum, built by the Emperor Vespasian to glorify his family, the Flavian dynasty, and so it went on. But no, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to put your best foot forward. You're supposed to put one foot back. So it does go completely against the way people have been brought up. And what profit is there for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? So think of Julius Caesar. He became dictator of Rome, but he still ended up dead, didn't he, at the foot of Pompey's statue. And did he do well? Well, what's happened to him now? He's gone to the underworld. Not a good bargain. And so on. Now, then, bottom of the page, he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him, and 3 days after his death he will rise. They did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, what were you arguing about on the way? But they remained silent. Embarrassment. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. And then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, if anybody wishes to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me. Now, children in Roman times had no legal status. They're a bit like today. You couldn't sue your parents in those days if you were a child. And of course, if you were a child, your parents had complete control over you. you were a non-entity in the sight of the law. And of course, if you were a bad child, your parents could beat you. And if you were a really bad child, your parents could have you executed. That was perfectly legal. It's a bit tempting, isn't it? The thing about that now. But your beatings and executions, perfectly okay. And if you remember Brutus, the original Brutus was a Roman hero, he had both his sons executed. And everybody said, well, obviously it was pretty tough for him rather than for them. And but everybody admired him greatly because, putting aside your feelings about your children and doing what you have to do, doing what the law required you to do. Now, the thing is, who wants to be the greatest? They wanted to be the greatest. Who is the greatest? It's not about being the greatest, it's about being the least. So it's a complete inversion of of contemporary mores, contemporary way of doing things. So what you've got here, we've often heard it said, Christianity is meant to be countercultural. Christianity is meant to be countercultural, and it was countercultural from the very beginning. The disciples of Jesus, following Jesus, turn their backs on social advancement and rather go for the opposite of social advancement. They become downwardly mobile rather than upwardly mobile. They want to take the lowest place, which seems incredible. Now, if you were one of those early Christians, it is actually quite challenging. Let's say you were from a senatorial family or from one of the equites, one of the Roman knights. Would you really want to get down with the slaves? And some people say, well, this is ridiculous. This is inverse snobbery. Now, this is what Jesus is saying. He's saying that you must go for the lowest place, not the highest place. Now, as you know, a Roman started off life and did what was called the cursus honorum, the course of honours. So first you became a praetor, then you became a quaestor, then you became a this, and then eventually you became a consul. The idea being it was sort of an upward ladder of promotion. Whereas Jesus is saying no ladder of promotion, let's have a ladder of demotion. And of course, he himself is planning on or is contemplating a massive demotion from being the son of a carpenter, which was okay, I suppose. He wasn't a Roman citizen, he was the son of a carpenter, he wasn't a slave, he was educated, and so on and so forth. Yet he is going to become the lowest of the low, a man who is crucified. What a failure that is. He ended badly, people would have said. But on the third day he would rise again. So ask yourself, what is the worst sin a Christian could commit? Well, I mean, don't all shout at once. It's clearly if we look at this passage, ambition. I want to get on in life. There are quite a lot of people who do say that. But ambition is just simply the wrongest thing of all. Okay. And of course, one of the things that was often levelled at Romans who became Christians at that time, how can you do this? Join a religion which is full of slaves and hucksters and pickpockets and thieves and so on and so forth. Well, how could you lower yourself in this way? It's a disgrace. It's a scandal. And it was considered a terrible scandal when upper class Romans became Christians. That's why they were hustled off to execution pretty quickly. Okay, now this next bit is in chapter 10. They were on their way going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus went ahead of them. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. Now, I think this is telling us it's going to be difficult to follow Jesus. It's going to be difficult to give up your ambitions. It's going to be difficult to get used to the idea that you are destined to suffer and impossibly to be put to death. That's why, if you are afraid, then that's why you're afraid. Don't you think? They were afraid. They said, where are we going? We're going up to Jerusalem, where he says he's going to be crucified. But what's going to happen to us? Because if they're going to crucify him, what are they going to do to us? They were amazed, they were stupefied and afraid. Taking the 12 aside, he began to tell them what was going to happen to him. Behold, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes. They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, spit upon him, scourge him, and put him to death. But after 3 days he will rise. Now it's terribly specific that. Spit on him, scourge him, and put him to death. So horrific is that thought that they rather forget the last bit about the rising from the dead. They say, well, which of course they have no experience of, but they know what scourging and spitting is all about. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him and said, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. He replied, What do you wish me to do for you? They answered, Grant that in your glory we may sit one on your right and one the other on your left. Jesus said to them, You do not know what you are asking. You want the glory, but you rather want to skip the intermediate bit, the suffering. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? They said, We can. Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right or my left is not mine to give, but is for those to whom it's been prepared. When the 10 heard this, they became indignant at James and John. So Jesus summed them and said, You know that those who are recognized as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones make their authority over them felt. But it shall not be among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be slave of all. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So, power is service. Leadership is service. Being first is service. Not getting other people to do what you want them to do for you, but rather ask yourself what you can do for them. So, whereas everybody in the Roman Empire was essentially the slave of Caesar, now the equivalent of Caesar, Jesus Christ, the head of the church, is the slave of everybody. Now, are we able to take on board that the following of Jesus is essentially an exercise in humility? I think that's what it's saying. Don't know. They were afraid. They could not understand this. Anyway, what about those who fail to follow Jesus? Now he said, You will follow me, to James and John. You will. You'll do well. Oh, yes, we can, they say. Yes, you will. Careful what you wish for, but you will. Although it will be quite difficult, and you think you will be able to do it, but you probably don't realize what you're taking on. But when the time comes for you to take it on and to actually do it, you'll succeed. So it's rather encouraging. So yeah, you'll do well in the end. You seem so. In other words, the reader of this book says, "Yes, I can follow Jesus." Well, you'll do well. He's saying, might be a few ups and downs before you finally pass that final exam, but you will pass the final exam. Then we have in the gospel those who do not follow Jesus. They were also women looking on from a distance. These women had followed him when he was in Galilee, but now they were just spectators. So they failed to follow him to the end. But later, as we know, they changed their minds. And then, of course, what did the disciples do in chapter 14? They all left him and fled. They turned tail and fled, the opposite of following. They'd been following him, and now they did a reverse ferret. They did a 3-point turn. They fled. Not good. But later, we know they changed their minds. Which clearly is a message to the reader. Well, what happens if I become a follower and then suddenly things get a bit difficult and I fall away, or I reverse gear, is that it? Clearly not, because those disciples were later rehabilitated. Again, in chapter 14, verse 52, he ran off. That's St. Mark. He ran off, but in the next chapter, he's back.
St. Mark?
Yeah, that he ran off. Yeah, I mean, he hightailed it out of there. At that statement, this is the rich young man, his face fell, and he went away sad, for he had many possessions. And maybe one of the people reading this will say, well, I'm a terribly rich man. How on earth am I going to deny myself? Am I going to give up all my riches? Am I going to live as a poor man? Am I going to give it all away? As indeed many of the early Christians did. And I said, well, it's a bit much to ask. It's a big ask, isn't it? And so his face fell, and he went away sad. He had many possessions. And this might be one of the readers would say, well, no, I'm a bit like that rich young man. I cannot do what is asked of me, and therefore I will go away. But there's a little clue here. He went away thinking, well, thank God for that. That's brilliant. No, it says he went away sad. And maybe he stayed at home feeling, well, I've got all these wishes, but I'm sad. And then he changed his mind. So I think when we have the following of Jesus, you might have a trajectory. You might imagine it like this. You start here, you start following Jesus until you have perfect union with God, an uphill struggle, well, an uphill trajectory, a slope. But it's not like that. It's more like this. You start there, and then you do really well. Then you go down, then you go up, then you go down, then you go up. There might be moments when you follow really closely, and then there might be moments when you follow not so closely, or you don't follow at all. And then your following revives, and then it undergoes a renaissance, and you really do follow very well for some time, and then it tails off, and then it revives. And maybe instead of like that, it's more like that. Maybe the overall trajectory is up, but there are lots of curves, dips, and so on. Now, anyway, I'm not sure what the point I've been making is that I think that the point is this: Jesus is calling you to follow him. And you, the reader of St. Mark's Gospel, are constantly being asked to follow him. And you're reading the book and seeing how many different types of people followed him. And you are hopefully feeling the stirrings, as you read it, of your vocation, that you too could somehow be part of this immense crowd that follows Jesus. Any questions about that?
Thinking about the chapter possessions.
Yes, the rich young man.
Yeah, he went away sad because I guess he didn't really want to get rid of them.
That's true.
He changed his mind and did.
Maybe he changed his mind. It's left open.
Yeah.
It's left, and this rich young man, is he actually a person, or is he actually a composite? Is he just somebody with whom the reader can identify? Is he there so rich readers can identify with him? Many of you are loaded. And maybe you're feeling that your riches are not stopping you following God. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's really the case nowadays. I'm not sure.
You know, because I feel like I've got everything I need.
Yes.
And if someone came into the house tonight, touch wood.
That's not wood.
Oh,
yeah. You got insurance.
Yeah. I won't be that worried.
Does God want us to live without insurance? I mean, I don't have any insurance. I never have insurance when we only go on holiday and say, would you like to buy some insurance? I said, nope. It's a waste of money. Think of how much money I've saved never buying insurance.
But would that count? Because God knows that I don't really care about having riches.
Hopefully. I don't know.
Yeah,
What is our attitude to our earthly wealth? Do we feel I think that, you see, one of the things is, in the time of Jesus, if we look at this from a socio-economic point of view, in the time of Jesus there were lots of people who were living a hand-to-mouth existence, and there were a few people who were loaded, who had, like Crassus, and like the Roman aristocracy, had huge amounts of land, thousands of slaves, tons and tons of money, and so on coming in. Their riches were held in, obviously, gold and jewels, but mainly in land. And there were also people making huge amounts of money via trade. There's no doubt about that. The Romans did have a banking system, but I don't know quite how it worked. So there were some very rich people, and there were also lawyers who got very well paid, and so on and so forth. But that was a very small amount of people. Most of the peasantry, the slaves some slaves became very rich and bought their freedom, of course. The peasantry wouldn't have been well off at all, and the ordinary people wouldn't have been particularly well off. But this idea that we, on the contrary, most of us are extremely well off, I hope. Very, very few of us are on our uppers. It's very rare that actually, according to George Orwell, the poor, he talks about the Catholic Church is very concerned about the poor. Who do they mean when they're talking about the poor? It's the 1930s. Presumably, it means the unemployed. The unemployed were very badly off in the 1930s because unemployment pay was unemployment benefit, or whatever it was called, the dole, was just enough to keep you going, but not much more than that. So perhaps those who are on benefits now and just have benefits are what we'd call people who are poor. But this thing about the rich young man's aimed at those who are rich. But very few of us are stratospherically rich. We're just comfortable, aren't we? So what is God asking us to do as our part of our following of our blessed Lord? What role, or how are we to manage our wealth?
It's not the Gospel of Mark, but isn't there what Jesus says about the disciples said, well, who can be saved?
Yeah. It's richer for a
camels go through the eye of a
needle than for a rich man to be saved.
Whatever that. Jesus says, for man it's impossible,
but nothing is impossible for God.
So
yeah,
is that what's that? Is that
I don't know. It seems to be a sort of something a little bit. It seems almost like a riddle, doesn't it? Because this story about the eye of a needle is this very narrow gate. The camel cannot fit through unless it takes off its burdens and then shuffles through on the ground, and so on and so forth. I don't know. I think if we look at it from the modern point of view, if we are comfortable, are we willing to share our comforts with other people? So, for example, you're driving along in your Mercedes, or if you don't have a Mercedes, what do you have? Do you have a Mercedes? What do you have? A Ford. A Ford Titanium. What a silly name that is. Who's got? I mean, this is how you have you got a Mercedes? Have you got a Mercedes? You. What's the best sort of? Everybody in Africa. Yeah, in Africa, everybody wants a Mercedes because that's why the people who've got Mercedes are called Wabenzi, the people of the Mercedes. It means anybody. It means a special social status if you've got a Mercedes. So, what is the car that everybody wants? A Jag. A Jag. Well, do you remember
an Aston,
a roller, an Aston Martin, a Jag, BMW, a small BMW. One of the things is the late great Cardinal Murphy O'Connor. He did say one thing which was of great interest to us all, that this was the gin and two Jags diocese. I think he must have regretted saying that because now it's the only thing we remember he said. I mean, a jag is a jag. Okay, let's say you have a jag. Let's say you have a jag. Has anybody actually? Nobody's got a jag here.
I've had a jag.
Oh, you've had a jag.
So an
So,
old second-hand XJ, that's what you want.
oh
30
yes.
years old. Like sitting in your front room, marvelous.
Yeah, I've driven a jag once. My brother had a jag, but the terrible thing is, if you made a false turning, it cost you about £5 in petrol. You know, it would say drank petrol. Okay, you've got a jag. It drinks petrol, but you don't mind because you don't. It's lovely and so on. Are you willing to stop and give somebody a lift in your jag?
Not these.
Not somebody you know.
Not my driving.
I did used to drive for Age Concern. My jag.
Oh, right. Well, then very good. Okay. Would you give a lift to somebody in your jag to take them to church? Would you?
Someone I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do realise crime is a big thing nowadays, but would you say to somebody, oh, if let's say you arrived in church in your jag, and the somebody was there with their children, and the children said, oh, that's a jag, and they said, oh, I'd love to go for a ride in your jag, and you said to the child, come on then, let's go for a ride in the jag. Is yours, I mean, this is a theological concept, is yours an open jag or a closed jag? Again, is your house an open house or a closed house? An Englishman's home is his castle.
I think that's a much more thing to think about with your house and open. Who would be willing to just let anybody in?
Well, you don't just let anybody in, but you do say to some people, oh, do come round. You know, do come round. And to some people, you should say, do come round whenever you want.
I don't really mind people coming round.
Yeah. Getting rid of them but getting rid of them might be hard.
But don't really want people to come when it's in a mess.
Yeah, well, that's true. I think, though, I mean, maybe, are you house proud? Maybe you should say, come on in. It's a terrible mess, but it's home. You know, I think we've got to, you know, are we, if somebody says to you, again, it's your car, are you prepared to share it? Your house, are you prepared to share it? Are you prepared to share the other thing they say? This is the usual one, your time. Or do you say, I'm far too busy right now? I'm sorry, I'm terribly busy. Well, by the way, could you just help me with this? Oh, I'm terribly busy. Are you willing to volunteer to help other people? This is when you consider there are so many people there's a whole load of people in Britain today who never speak to another human being unless they go into a shop. I can't remember what percentage of the population it is. It's quite a lot of old people who are on their own. The reason there's so many old people on their own, of course, is an interesting question. But, you know, to repair the damage of old people being on their own, to just be there for other people, this is one of the things that's part of a follower of Jesus. The other thing I suppose you'd also have to say is, if you've got lots of money or some money, how much of it are you giving away to charity? A lot.
So it's tithing, basically. Tithing.
Yeah, I mean, this 10% tithing, I think 10% is rather a lot. But the idea, I do think you shouldn't give to certain charities. I think there's certain people who importune you for money, you know, and you should just tell them that you're not going to give them any. Fine. I might be talking about the drug addicts on the street. I might be talking about the RSPCA, Britain's biggest charity. It's British. People will give money to sick cats, but not to sick children. It's true. And I know some of you like cats. It was quite extraordinary. For example, there was an animal orphanage in Kenya, and there were these baby elephants who were fed on what in Kenya they call formula, which I think is powdered milk, isn't it? And the baby elephants would come out at 2:30 in the afternoon, and employees would give them their bottles. They go, and everybody would go, oh, lovely. All these tourists would gawp, and they would all pay to see the baby elephants being fed. However, down the road, there was orphanages with babies and small children in. And I remember we used to go to this orphanage at Christmas time, And I used to make this cake to take to the orphans. The orphans would give us this list of stuff they wanted. So, and the number one thing they wanted was shoes. And then we would take them things to eat, cake. And I was making this cake for the orphans. And I don't know if you know this, but um, if you live at 5,000 feet, baking things in the oven can be quite problematic. And if you've got a very bad oven, it's very problem. You have to take the cake out and turn it round and so on. So what happens is one end of the cake is raw, one end of the cake is burnt. That's what happens. It's a huge cake, huge tin. And somebody said to me, "Oh, don't fuss about it. These orphans have never tasted cake. They'll be fine if it's burnt. They won't know any different." Poor little orphans had never had cake. And yet the baby elephants were guzzling formula. So if you were a baby elephant in Kenya, you were better looked after than if you were a human being, an orphan. Isn't that? I mean, that. So what? Now, why am I telling you this? Well, some charities we should support, and some type of charities we shouldn't have already got enough supporters so you can leave them. So are we going to support charities? Well, we do support charities, don't we? We do. Hmm? Are we supporting charities? The food bank, we're supporting the food bank. What else do we support? Well, yeah, there are lots of charities support. Aid to the Church in Need, there CAFOD, there are lots of charities. But the other thing is, let's say you've got no money, you can still support a charity. The worst comes to worst, you can go and work in a charity shop, you can go and work in Oxfam, which is a really good idea. The other thing you can do is you can just come along and you can join one of these social groups and so on where you just spend time with people. Say, "Hello, how are you?" There's some people, of course, who are very difficult to help. People, particularly people suffering from mental disease, are very difficult to help. Particularly people suffering from mental disease who don't want to take the pills are very hard to help. But so it is a challenge. But our Blessed Lord says, "Take up your cross and follow me." And sometimes you do meet people who have taken up their cross, followed our Blessed Lord. They've got a close relative, who is essentially very, very unwell mentally and who won't take the pills and so on and so forth. I met a woman who told me my mother is I think we call it in England, a street drinker. She's living on the street, drinking methylated spirits or something like that. And I said, "Well, what have you done to help her?" And this lady said, "Everything. Everything." And she detailed what everything consists of. And she had done everything, by the way. She had really done everything. So sometimes it does come to the case where you just have to carry the cross. And the cross is, we tried to help so-and-so, we failed. We can't do anything. We've got to accept failure. So to follow our Blessed Lord is to have an open Jaguar, is to have an open house, is to have support charities, and to support people with your time. What else is it? And to support people with your prayers, I suppose.
I think we see an example in that with Lazarus, the poor man.
Yeah.
And the rich man.
Oh, yeah, and the rich man did nothing. He had a house.
It's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
The rich man literally done nothing.
He did nothing. What have you done? You've done nothing. That's what we always say to people, isn't it? What have you ever done? You've done nothing. It's true, isn't it? And if that's true, it's a bit depressing. You've done nothing. And indeed, what we have done and what we have failed to do. So presumably, let's say the people who first read St. Mark's Gospel, people like Flavia Domitilla, great niece of the emperor, or niece of the emperor, presumably she was working in a soup kitchen in Rome, along with a whole load of slaves. You do get this. Very posh people who go out and help in soup kitchens, don't you? The fashionable soup kitchen to help, then it becomes fashionable, of course. The fashionable soup kitchen was, of course, the Passage, the one set up by Cardinal Hume. And you do get people who, I'm trying to think, can you think of any very famous society beauties who dedicated themselves to helping the poor? I mean, there were lots of saints who did it, but modern society beauty. Yes, I suppose so. Mother Teresa was certainly one of them. She wasn't a society beauty, but any other society beauties who did that?
So, who's the role that died recently?
Catherine Kent,
Yeah.
as she called herself. Yeah, she actually went and got a job as a piano teacher in a rough primary school in Hull, the well-known beauty spot. And so I think, that there was something there, wasn't there? And I think that any other, it used to be the case back in the 1930s and even up to the 1960s, society beauties would go to the East End and work in youth clubs. And of course, do you remember what's his name? Profumo. He worked in the East. He was married to a society beauty, Valerie Hobson, and he worked in a charity. Yeah, after his fall from grace. One of the things is, if ever you have a fall from grace, that's what you go and do. And one person who was not a society beauty in any sense was Bishop Eamon Casey. Now, Bishop Eamon Casey did two things after the scandal engulfed him. One, he grew a beard, and two, he moved to Latin America and he worked in the missions. Oh, yeah, in Ecuador, in the middle of nowhere. And then he came back and he worked in, believe it or not, another place in the middle of nowhere, Haywards Heath. And when he was in Haywards Heath, he'd lost his license because, drink. So there was this lady who used to drive him around. Every day he went to the hospital and visited all the sick people in the hospital. Then he went to Sainsbury's and he went home. And when I went to Haywards Heath, he'd just retired and gone back to Ireland. He'd started to go, he was losing his marbles. And people would come up to me in the hospital and say, "How is Father Eamon?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." So, "Oh, he was wonderful. When my grandmother was in hospital, he came and visited her every day. What a wonderful priest." So Father Eamon Casey, Bishop Eamon Casey, died in the odour of sanctity, although there was a huge scandal in the past, blah, blah, blah. He just spent his time with people in hospital saying, "How are you?" And that's really what you need to do. Yeah.
Also, we do see in the Bible that there are people of great wealth, like Job, Abraham is mentioned.
Yeah, he's got lots of sheep.
Jacob.
And cattle. Yeah.
Jacob as well. So
yes. He had lots of wives.
Solomon.
Yeah, Solomon had hundreds of wives.
So it's not the case of being rich, it's what you do with it.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the things is that Solomon is actually quite fiercely criticized in the Bible, because one of the things he introduced was what is usually translated as la corvée, forced labor. In other words, you had to build his roads and things like that for him 30 days a year and things like that. And Solomon, and also he had all these wives who led his heart astray. Whereas King David was obviously much more down-to-earth sort of person at the beginning, whereas Solomon became rather cut off. One of the criticisms of the royal family that is made in Britain today, this was made to me by a well-known person. He said to me, "What have they ever done for the poor?" Very little. The royal family of once upon a time did a great deal. Queen Victoria made lots and lots of charitable donations, and so did William IV and Queen Adelaide. And I think, and presumably so did George III and people like that. But after the time of Queen Victoria, I don't think you have this idea of going and working with poor people, or even just handing out money to poor people. But yeah, there's that, isn't it? That is actually a symbolic helping of the poor. But the king is supposed to be the protector and the helper of the poor.
The Queen Mother.
Oh, God bless her.
She donated her own money, or maybe her daughter's money.
Yeah, she had massive debts. Yes, other people's money. Yeah.
To building student accommodation.
Really? Really? Well, that's jolly good.
Anonymous donor.
Yeah. Yes, she did, and visited people in hospital with her sons. That was very impressive, actually, when you think about it. Quite anonymously. One of the things is, I remember a friend of mine used to go every year on the Knights of Malta pilgrimage to Lourdes. And she said to me, "Oh, it's really very impressive when you see Roman princesses washing floors." I mean, that sort of thing, rolling up their sleeves and so on and so forth. Very, very, very important. And therefore, actually spending time with socially disadvantaged people. I said in that wonderful seminal article that I wrote after Pope Leo was elected, I said, in the Catholic world, everybody believes we should help the poor, etc. However, very few people have actually met any poor people. When you get somebody who's actually spent time with socially disadvantaged people, as Pope Leo has done, that is pure gold. Because he's like Mother Teresa. He was working with people who had nothing, and you saw him riding his horse and standing in floodwaters in his Wellington boots and things like that. That was very, very impressive. This is a guy who spent time with people who have nothing, not gin and 2 jags. And Mother Teresa, the person we all love, the most important Catholic of our time, is Mother Teresa, isn't she? Nobody comes close to Mother Teresa. She was even mentioned in EastEnders. Do you remember that? Said one of the characters said to the other, "You're no Mother Teresa." I mean, it's the ultimate accolade for a Catholic. How many other saints have been mentioned in EastEnders? I think we better stop there because we're almost. Yes, one last. It's getting dark.
People are doing things and nobody knows about it.
Hopefully, yes. I think that's how you're supposed to do it. You do stuff and nobody knows about it. Yes, I think that's true. I mean, Catherine Kent, the Duchess of Kent, nobody knew about that. And that was, she was clearly a deeply, deeply Christian person. And nobody knew about that at all until after she was dead. Well, I'd heard about it. You knew about it. I'd heard about it. But you didn't read about it in the Daily Mail or see photographs of her turning up and smiling at poor people. So, no, you didn't see that.
She changed her religion, didn't she?
She became one of us. She did. She had, in many ways, a very difficult, sad life. But she, she was an outstanding member of the royal family, as indeed was dear old Queen Adelaide, after whom our local pub is named, who was a very, very kind person who went around being nice to people. One of the things about the monarchy of old is that George III and his 8 children, or 9 children, or 12 children, 15 children, I think some had died, hadn't they? 12 children, 13 children. They used to walk up and down the seafront in Weymouth. And people say, look, who's that fat guy? Oh, that's the king. Yeah. And who's the ugly woman with him? Oh, that's Queen Charlotte. She's terribly nice, etc. They were far more in touch with people. They didn't have a police force in those days either. And anybody could go up to them. Even Louis XIV, his poorer subjects could go up to him. So there you have it. We're getting off the topic. We better stop there. It's getting dark. All the best. Good night.